Welcome to Municipal Affairs International Edition. Every December, we take a deep dive into the intricacies of local governance systems from around the globe. Last year, we explored Australia's unique approach to local government, and as we near the end of 2024, we're heading across the pond to examine the state of local government in the United Kingdom. And joining us for today's deep dive is from our sister show, the Political Trenches Local Government at Work, co-host Ian McCormack. The UK system of local governance is steeped in history, yet continues to evolve in response to modern challenges. In today's episode, we'll explore how it functions today, comparing it to Canada's approach to local government. What similarities and differences exist between these two nation systems? How do they each address the complexities of providing services, engaging citizens, and adapting to change? To help us unpack these questions, we're thrilled to welcome Colin Copus as our guest. Colin is a professor of local politics at De Montfort University and the director of the Local Governance Research Unit. With an extensive career that includes academic roles at Birmingham University Institute of Local Government Studies, work as a local government officer, and policy research in the UK's House of Commons, Colin brings a wealth of experience to the table. Not only that, but his firsthand experience as a councillor across various levels of government, from parish to county councils, make him uniquely qualified to shed light on the state of local government in the UK today. Are you passionate about local governance and municipal issues? Do you believe in the power of community-driven conversations? Then join us at the Cross Border Network, where we bring together voices from across Canada to shine a spotlight on the challenges and the triumphs of our municipalities. But we need your support to keep the conversation going. Visit crossborderinterviews.ca today to show your support by backing the show monthly or making a one-time annual donation. Your contribution will help us grow and expand our reach, bringing important stories to even more listeners across the nation. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can amplify the voices of local communities. Together, we can shape a brighter future for all. Cross Border Network, where local matters and your support counts. Visit us today at crossborderinterviews.ca. Colin, thank you so much for joining the show today. As one of the leading experts, if not the leading experts on all things local governments in the United Kingdom, it is fascinating to sit down with you to talk about the state of local governance in the United Kingdom today. But before we get into the crux of the interview and talk about the state, I want to ask if you can give the elevator pitch, because we have listeners from across Canada who may not know the function and the structure of local governments in the United Kingdom. So from an outsider's perspective, what's the elevator pitch of what the local governance does in the United Kingdom?
Right. Well, I mean, what it does is very much controlled by the centre, which has a habit of taking things away and giving things back and a churn of responsibilities. And it also depends on the tier of local authority as well. So, what local government does is actually not an easy question to answer, unfortunately. And added to that, there are three systems across the UK. So, there's a system in Scotland, there's a system in Wales, and a system in England. Scotland and Wales local government is a responsibility of their devolved chambers. In England, because there's no English Parliament, it's the British Parliament that is the controlling body of English local government. So that range of public services that I'm sure you're very familiar with as being responsibilities for local government, social care, housing, education provision, roads, certain elements of transport, parks, recreations, leisure facilities, all of those range of services that you would expect to rest with local government do in the three nations of the UK. But as I say, the crux of the issue there is that the centre can and does take responsibilities away and add new ones as and when it feels like it. And indeed, I think that's part of the problem local governments experience, is that churn of responsibilities. And a good example of that is social care, which was taken away from local government some years ago, given to the health service, the National Health Service, and then a few years after that was taken back from the National Health Service and put back into local government. One of the ways in which our centre makes itself look busy is to fiddle with local government. if you want me to be crude about it.
We like when people are crude and honest on this show. So more of that, please, Professor. Um, so with that in mind, how would you describe the state of local governance in the United Kingdom today with all those multifaceted prongs that you just talked about?
Pitiful, I think, would be my assessment. The problem that we have is the centralisation is baked into the system. And our councils, I think, probably similar to the role of the provinces in Canada, but our councils are creatures of statute. So they have no independent right to exist. They can and indeed are merged, abolished, and swept off the map of local government at the whim of the centre. So lacking that independent right to exist puts it immediately in an inferior position in terms of the centre. It's not seen as a partner, it's seen as an agent to do the centre's bidding. So we have local elections, and they are hard fought affairs. The unfortunate tendency, and this is a very broad generalization, the tendency is for the government of the day, depending on how unpopular it is, to do badly, and for the central opposition of the day to do well. So, in other words, our local council elections are often decided by people's view of what the centre is doing. That's not exclusively. There will be many, many people who will be thinking about what their local councillor does. When was the last time they saw them? What did they hear from them? Did they have to contact them? Were they good? What are the big issues in their area? What has the council done that has either offended them or caused them great pleasure? But the general sweep, and we saw this particularly in our elections last year, was that an unpopular central government was hammered at the local government polls. So you could have been a Conservative councillor who is exceptionally good. Your likelihood of holding your seat was diminished greatly by the unpopularity of the central government at the time. So that's a major problem. No right to exist. I always sum up local government in England, particularly, as being too big to be local and too little powers to be government. So if you looked at, let's take the second part first. If you looked at any definition of the word government in any decent dictionary, you could not apply that definition to local government in this country. You simply couldn't use that term. And if you look at the word local, we have some of the biggest units of local government across the globe. Our new government is looking at making it bigger still. There are already conversations going on about abolishing a number of councils and creating big unitaries with populations of around 500,000 or so, which for a country of a population of 56 million gives you an idea of how large those entities will be. Meaningless lines on a map for the convenience of the centre. And because our councils don't have the right to exist, there is little they can do about that. If the government decides to sweep them off the map, there's no way. You can appeal to the court, but you can only appeal to a court that the government has not acted in the way that it said it was or has acted illegally. You can't challenge the principle that they cannot abolish it. So, as I say, perilous, pitiful, but, our local government does some of the most incredible stuff in this country. And when we've had referendums in this country about abolishing tiers of government and creating unitaries, every single referendum there have been, they don't have to be held and they don't matter, government ignores them. But every single one that has been held has overwhelmingly, in some cases, supported the existing two-tier structure where it exists. So people like their smaller, expensive, we are told, local government. When given the option of a huge anonymous council, they vote against it. But in the past, where those votes have been held, the government of the day has simply ignored the result and swept those councils into the dustbin anyway.
I'm going to jump in now, Colin, if I may. You made reference to the relationship, the political relationship anyway, or mood-wise, between central and local government. We in Canada have a few areas which are either using political parties locally, none of which are directly aligned with federal or provincial parties. What's the role of parties, political parties in local government?
Right, they are dominant. The national political parties are dominant in local. And again, I'm talking specifically about England because Scotland and Wales, Scotland has a single transferable vote for their local elections, which means that they've established a four-party plus some bits system. Wales, because of the sort of the Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, they also have a four-party system effectively, although and I think they're moving to SDV, but they're not yet there yet. And in England, we have a straightforward first past the post plurality system. And currently, we have local elections in May of next year for the county councils and a few unitaries and elected mayors, but it's effectively for the counties. But currently, across the whole of England, something like 88% of all councillors come from one of the big three political parties: Labour, Conservative, or local or Liberal Democrats. That figure 10 years ago was as high as 95% of all councillors coming from one of the three main political parties. And what that tends to do is it means that local election campaigns are often dominated by the issues that the national political parties think are important, and they often reflect the national political battles. When you get to a council meeting of one sort or another, most of our councils have a very strong whipping system. So, or every member from one party will speak and vote one way, and every member from another party will say that's a load of old rubbish. And then the vote will be held, and the party that has the majority will win. And everybody knows that is what's going to happen, unless there are some, contentious issues that might prompt one or two councillors to break the whip. It's highly unlikely that you'll see anything other than the ruling party winning. What it also means, so 88% of all councillors coming from one of the three main parties, and an overwhelming number of our councils with a majority single party. Not as many again as there used to be 5-10 years ago, and there's a gradual eating away in that. So we do have a number of councils where there are coalitions of one sort or another, or minority administration. But for councillors, their political party looms very, very large in their lives and in what they do as elected members.
So given that, and noticing that the UK has had 6 different prime ministers over the last 10 years, has that had an impact on either the evolution of local government or the political persuasions of local government?
Only in the sense that if there happened to be local elections at a time a particular prime minister was particularly unpopular, and therefore the government was unpopular, then it would have an impact. But we have great chunks of the country that for a very long time, a single party, the same party, has controlled that particular council, whichever one that you might want to pick. Not necessarily the same people, obviously, although in some respects that may also be the case, but certainly the same party. That again is beginning to break down. We're seeing, but the reason it's breaking down is not because of a great shift, I think, in a great shift in the views of the electorate, but because fewer and fewer people are voting. And the fewer and fewer people that vote in local elections, the more and more likely they are to be driven by what's happening locally. So I think the breakdown has not been because certainly in the local elections there's a great realignment of parties or a breakdown. It's because fewer and fewer people are voting. And where they are presented with a choice, they often, the voters that is, pick one of the big three. Unless there's a particularly vociferous or popular local campaign where you might get members elected from a single issue group, and we've got a few sort of examples of that. But in terms of the centre and the relationship that it has with our political parties, the whole thing is linked. The control of national political parties does something to the conduct of local politics. It party politicizes every issue. So the council decides to do something, public outcry. All of the opposition are middle class homeowners who are only interested in the value of their properties, and they're all Tories anyway, or they're left wing trade union socialists who want to bring down, etc., etc. So we don't, everything can be party politicized by the very nature that national parties control our local government, and it makes them. Some council meetings can be fun. There's a bit of knockabout. There's a little bit of but as in far as enlightening the public as to what the heck is going on and why the council is doing what it is doing, you don't get that from watching a full council meeting, I would argue.
Thanks.
I want to jump in before we turn to our next segment, and I want to sort of ask a pointed question, because when I speak to municipal local leaders here in Canada, we are seeing a very apathetic nature grow in the responsibilities of what local governments do in Canada. People aren't going to council meetings as they used to do 10, 15 years ago. They blur the jurisdictional lines within what the federal government does, what the provincial government, territorial governments do, and what the municipalities do. In the United Kingdom, do you see that blurring of jurisdictional lines, and are local governments now dealing with that state issues or central issues that they once weren't dealing with because there's been sort of a neglect of those central issues?
Yeah, well, certainly local government will get the blame for or be contacted because things
So
are
that's not different than Canada then. Okay, good to know.
no. I mean, what I was going to say is, for example, I was talking to a group of councillors only last week, and they were arguing that they've got people, their constituents, coming up to them saying that they can't get an appointment with the GP, with the doctor. Now, the council has absolutely nothing to do with providing the GP services, but people think that this is my local representative. I know who they are. I know where they are. I know how to get in touch with them. I expect them to do something about this. And any half decent councillor will say, "Yep, I'll see what I can do." They're not going to go, "Nothing to do with me, Gov." They will try and engage with those issues. So there is that. There is that. By being the representative on the ground, people will come to you, irrespective of whether the issue is about what the council does. But also, I mean, the fragmentation in our system isn't really around local government. Some argue that, we have parish councils, not everywhere has them. We have district councils in some areas. We have county councils. It's very confusing for the public. Well, I can tell you, nobody wakes up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat going, "Oh, I don't know who takes the dustbins away and who deals with the rubbish. It's terrible. I'm so confused." Or if you are, you pick up a phone and go, "I'd like to talk to you about my son's school." And they say, "Oh, sorry, that's the county council. Here's a number." "Oh, thank you. I'm not confused anymore." It's an overplayed issue for those that want to make local government bigger. Very easy to find out today in local government who does what. But finding out about a whole other range of services that are provided by quangos, that are provided by the private sector, that are provided by all sorts of organisations, whether it's central government, whether it's some form of regional quango, that's the difficult bit. That's where the real confusion. If you want to complain about the health service, where do you go? Well, you could fill in one of their forms, and they'll tell you, "Thank you for your inquiry. Your inquiry is very useful to us, but we're going to ignore it." Who do you go to in those terms? This is why many people return to their councillors. I've elected you. You're powerful. You're in a position you can do something about this. So yes, there is confusion, but it's not really around local government. And most elected members, will go, "Bring me your problems." Bring me your problems, because that way I'm seen to be at least responding to some of the issues. And the more those problems are not about the council, the better.
I'd like to switch focus a little bit into things like public engagement and trust and abuse, if I can. Just before I do, done some work in Australia, and I like the way they describe their local government system as we deal with roads, rates, and rubbish. And I think that's kind of a nice little statement.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, of course, in this public engagement. To set the stage, though, do you have a working definition of what constitutes good governance at a local level?
Well, we tend to use something called the Nolan Principles, which was an inquiry that was conducted, oh, good while ago now, that looked at the whole issue of probity and behaviour in across the public sector. So there are these 10 principles that are enshrined in sort of thinking about what good governance might look like. And that tends to sit at the bedrock of any discussions about the behaviour of councillors, the behaviour of officers that work for local authorities, what people can expect from their elected member and from their council. And then there are other many definitions of good governance that sort of float around in academia, but drawing up something that is applicable to every type of council in every type of circumstance is a very difficult thing to do. And these Nolan principles, integrity in public office, are supposed to apply to the centre, to local government, and to every other public institution. This is how we expect you to behave. But interestingly enough, when I talk to councillors, quite clearly for them, for many of them, good governance is guaranteed by their party winning. That's how that's how you get good governance. Don't elect the other lot. But less flippantly, every councillor has this view of public service. The public service ethos isn't dead. Yes, they get involved in local politics because they want to pursue the interests of their party, but that serving the public, that giving, and bearing in mind that they're not salaried in this country, they're not paid. Our councillors work off a system of allowances, makes it very difficult for anybody to make a living being a councillor. Some leaders in some authorities can, but not everybody by any manner of means. Nobody goes into local government to get rich. Nobody gets elected to become rich. They do it out of a sense of wanting to contribute, wanting to see fairness and equity in the system, wanting to deal with local problems. Yes, absolutely thinking I can do better than the other lot and anybody else, which is, fair enough motivation in many respects. So that idea that, we have these Nolan principles, but also there's this question of the public service ethos that does drive many people to become elected as councillors. So it's certainly there, that idea of integrity. It's a really difficult concept. You look at the House of Commons and it's sort of full of that, sort of artificial, I'd like to remind the honourable member opposite that he's an absolute swine. You think, okay, I've taken the sting out of that because I've called you honourable, and yeah, expecting local politics, particularly there to be some rough and tumble. And you can't, and neither should you, in my view, take that out of the system. But that doesn't mean to say that the people engaged in that rough and tumble aren't doing it because they simply have conflicting views about what good governance means and about what providing for their municipality is all about.
Yeah. So if we explore that just a little bit more, do you find a concern about within local government about local leaders seeing a rise in incivility or abuse, either from their colleagues or from the public in Britain or elsewhere in the UK?
Yeah, the two things particularly. If I take the issue of abuse and intimidation of elected members first, I was involved in a report for the Council of Europe, which is a 47 member institution, not the EU. It's associated with it, but it's not the EU. It's a much bigger, broader institution. And we drafted a report that looked at abuse and intimidation of elected members across those 47 nations. And it's quite clear that this is a growing international problem for elected members at all levels of local government. They are, and it's, when you think about it, they're on the spot. You know, you can find out who your councillor is. You can find out where they live. You can turn up on their doorstep. You can, you know, go up to them in the shop or the pub or the school playground in a way that you can't with members of parliament. You can't approach them in that way. And we're finding that abuse and intimidation online and abuse and intimidation of elected members in real time, in real life, assaults, insults, all sorts of appalling things, attacks on property and person and families and friends is definitely a growing trend. Our local government association recently produced a report called Debate Not Hate, which sets out the ways in which we can protect elected members. An association over here called the Association of Public Sector Excellence has also been doing some work on what we can do to identify this problem and solve it. But I think my sort of assessment at the moment, not enough councils are doing enough to protect their elected members from abuse and intimidation. Some have got very good records, but as you would expect in local government, you know, localism will mean that some are not as good. Some police forces are all over it. You know, it's a big issue for them, and it's something that they take very seriously. I've had councillors also, you know, say to me in one interview or another, I reported this to the police, and they sort of went, well, you're a councillor, it comes with the territory. You know, you put yourself up for this, get on with it. So we're finding different responses. I mean, I've argued for a long time that physical assaults on elected councillors should be an aggravating offence. If something goes to court, it's an aggravated offence, so it increases the punishment. You have picked on that person because they are an elected member. The other question about a sort of behaviour, it's a you know, it's a hoary-handed one, this one. It comes up a lot. It periodically raises and dips below there. The one thing I would say most definitely is we, in this country anyway, we are not experiencing a tsunami of badly behaving councillors. It just isn't. You know, it isn't there. It's not even epidemic. It's probably not even endemic. It's that there are one or two members in one or two councils that have caused problems by their behaviour. But what we tend to do in this country anyway is go for sanctions rather than understanding the causes. And I mean, if you look at local government, it's a representative institution. And that means to say that it represents the whole gamut of human vices and human virtues. So we have honourable, wise, gentle, kind elected members. And on the other hand, we have silly, mendacious, bullying members. That's true representation. You've got the whole, that, you know, you look out the window, you can meet anybody like that. So they're all represented. And I always argue that, you know, if you were born angry and you were an angry teenager and you were angry in middle age and you've been elected to a council, expecting you not to be angry anymore is a little bit of a big ask, you know. So we need to understand why some members do what they do. And one of the reasons in this country, particularly, lack of support, lack of information. You know, we have something in this country, I don't know if you have it in Canada, a public information request. So you can make a request and they have to. I've had councillors telling me they've had to use this to get information from a council of which they're an elected member. You know, so a mechanism for the public to get information councillors have to use because officers and others in their council won't tell them what they want to know. Now, if anything's bonkers and completely undermines the whole point of being elected to a council, that's it. You know? So if anything's guaranteed to get anybody angry, me and anybody else, it's saying, no, you can't have it. I'm not going to give it. Oh, sorry, I forgot to attach it to the email. I'm not. So, so we need to think about some of this. I'm not denying that some people's lives can be made difficult by councillors that behave in ways that we wouldn't want necessarily to tolerate. And I'm not saying that asking why every time solves the issue. There are some people that need to be dealt with in different ways, but we need to look at the support. We need to look at the way party politics operates. This whole idea that we can't give the opposition anything. We have to look at, what's a bullet. I put it this way. So somebody complains, well, this councillor's been on the phone 4 times today. I'm being bullied. Okay. Meanwhile, the councillor's constituent is going around telling their neighbour, he's brilliant. He's been on to the council 4 times today. That's fantastic. That's exactly what I want my councillor to do. So who's right and who's wrong? And we don't tend to have that level of analysis in the debate about behaviour. One of the things that's happening at the moment, this current government has bought into this narrative that there is a tsunami of badly behaving councillors. As I said earlier, it's a way of not looking at the way people behave in the House of Commons and the way MPs behave. But anyway, they're looking at this. Now, one of the issues that it constantly gets spread, the sanctions aren't strong enough for members that break the code of conduct, that breach the rules or that bully or what have you. But one of the issues that's coming up is should councils be able to suspend members for 6 months? Well, my answer is no, they shouldn't be able to do that. 2 reasons. One, under the 1972 Local Government Act, if a councillor misses 6 months worth of meetings, they're automatically disqualified. So I think there's an issue going on there that somebody's realised, but they ain't saying. That if we kick councillors off the council for 6 months, we suspend them, automatically they're disqualified. Yeah, so I think there's an element of that going on. But also, the misuse of that, the potential for misusing that by political opponents to either silence members that are doing a good job, or by officers to silence members that are being a little bit too assiduous and getting a little too close to one of these things, is too great a risk when compared to the incidences of what might be called genuine bullying. We know that every incident that will go to one of these panels will be a suspension for 6 months. I tell you that now. It won't be a month, it won't be 2 months, it won't be going to training course, it will be, we're suspending you. We've just had a case, only reported this week, that 4 officers, I'm not going to say where, 4 officers in one of our councils have just been arrested on charges of bribery. Okay. Now you imagine you had this 6 month suspension rule in place, and you imagine the effect that could have on members, elected members, challenging, questioning, investigating, trying to find out what goes on. All those officers, or other officers, I should say, not bad, because there's a case going on and I can't say anything about it and all the rest of all those sort of things. But the ability to stop a member doing what they're elected to do, to question, to challenge, to analyse, again, you are throwing all of that out because 1 or 2 councillors can't behave themselves or lose their temper or get angry and insult somebody, or even genuinely bully them. There are other things that can be done. And I worry greatly about the sanctity of the office of councillor if that comes into play. And I worry greatly about what's really motivating this particular agenda and this particular demand for this sanction. My view is the voters elected a member, it's their job to get rid of them. Right? Now you can have other sanctions, but that ability to kick a councillor off the council for any given period of time is something I believe only the electorate should be able to do. Many disagree, but you can interview them to ask them why.
Thank you.
I'm not going to tell you what they think, other than they're wrong, obviously.
Thanks. Are codes of conduct mandatory or codes of ethics mandatory?
Yeah, we have codes of conduct. The issue for many here are, what's in, are the sanctions strong enough? Not necessarily what's in there. There are issues within the various codes. There used to be a national code of conduct, and then as a result of the 2011 Localism Act, they were localized. So, but also people look for example, what should we have in this? So you end up having broadly similar things anyway. But yes, they are, and breaches of those codes of conduct are serious or allegations of breaches of them are serious things. But as I say, the issue is at the moment, the demand that sanctions aren't good enough is what's driving our debate rather than values.
Right.
You know, you asked the question earlier about integrity and those sorts of issues. You know, how you inculcate the public service values, how you inculcate good governance into elected members is going to be far more valuable than a power to kick them off when they break something that they haven't really been trained into thinking about anyway.
Right. My last question on this section, then, what I'd like to end perhaps on a bit more positive. What can we do or can happen to improve citizen engagement, citizen confidence in local government?
Well, actually, interesting. Over here, whenever there are surveys of satisfaction with local government and a whole host of other public institutions, whether it's the health service, central government, the police, whatever it happens to be, local government satisfaction rates are always the highest, or amongst the highest. Equally on the question of trust, it's one of those sort of sweet ironies of local government. Everybody moans about it, but when they're asked, they trust it more than they trust almost anybody, certainly more than they trust central government. Mm-hmm. And surveys have shown that people trust their councillors more than they trust their members of parliament. So there's that sort of, we're starting off from that basis of there is a good level of public support. Certainly in my country, there's a good level of support for local government. But that doesn't always play itself out into engagement and how we engage, because people are cynical and understandably so. Here's a decision I want to consult you on. That's not really the way to go about it. Here's an issue we're looking to solve. Let's have some discussions and debate and get your ideas, and then we'll make our decision. And I had a classic bit of consultation from the health service a little while ago. They were reorganising. I know this isn't local. They were reorganising. They sent. This is the way we want our. Here's 3 options for our boundaries. Option number 1, of course, you'd be mad to want to do this. Option number 2, you'd be less mad to want to do that. Option number 3, this is brilliant, don't you think? It's almost like, so when you have consultation like that, don't bother. It's like I always used to argue about the EU referendum. If you don't want to know the answer, don't ask the question. But if you do ask the question, be prepared to respond. So I think the ways in which, and there are some excellent examples in local government in this country of genuine consultation, of the use of, citizens' juries, of deliberative democracy over quite intractable issues that goes through its pace before it goes to the elected representatives, and what the public say are part of the process of making that final decision. So, yeah, engage and consult before you make a decision. Don't have a fixed view about what you want to do. And if you hear things you don't like, be prepared to respond effectively. And I think those councils that go through consultation with that in mind are the ones that are really successful. But the other thing that often surprises me is how surprised our councils and councillors are by public reaction. We're going to close this school. Ooh, we didn't expect that. We didn't expect people to be annoyed about that. Well, you must anticipate those sorts of things. But there's a big disconnect. Trying to influence representative democracy by participative, consultative democracy isn't just a process of doing some things to listen to people. There has to be a shift in what people's ideas of representation means towards the spectrum of being more responsive to things that you hear. But some interesting experiments going on. They are under a legal requirement to consult. There is a legislative requirement, but on those areas that they don't, and actually some court cases end up saying you haven't consulted in the way that we would expect you to. But by and large, the practice outside of those statutory requirements is pretty good, and certainly better than the government's.
I want to take a moment, if you don't mind, and talk about the relationship between the central government and the local governments, and even the state governments as well, whether it be Scotland, Northern Ireland, or Wales. Here in Canada, we often describe local governments as the creatures of the provinces, or the children of the provinces, and the relationship is looked at as a lower level or even a second class citizen to those other two levels of government. Now, I know in the UK, because I'm that type of nerd who does this deep dive that actually reads these reports, there was the debate in the last few years around the distribution of powers between central and local governments, and it was put under the microscope under Boris Johnson's government with the white paper called Leveling Up.
Yeah.
This was brought up a lot during the last UK election.
Mm.
Keir Starmer, the current prime minister, talked about how it was just a slogan and they would be able to accomplish it. How do you see the relationship between central government and local government? Is it and I hate to use this word in this context, but a dictatorial statement where we're going to tell you what to do and we're not going to let you decide what to do? And if you have
Yeah.
any issues with it, sorry, but you're up creek without a paddle.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's pretty much like I explained with public consultation in some respects. We're going to consult with you. We'll all sit around the table. We'll have a discussion. But if you come up with something that we don't like, we're going to go along this line anyway. And I think that's the nature of centralist thinking. As I said right at the beginning, local government in this country doesn't have the right to exist.
So
It
why
is
does it?
controlled.
Can I ask that question? Can I ask that very stupid question? If
Yeah.
it doesn't
Well,
have the right to exist and the central government can decide, which you recently shared a social media post about, I think it was 15 local governments being up on the chopping block from
yeah,
MPs saying we don't need these councils. Why does
yeah.
local government exist if they don't need to?
Well, I would argue that since 1972, there was a report called the Redcliffe-Mould Report, which in 1969, which recommended 58 unitary councils across England. And that today would give you a population, an average population of 900,000 for a single council. Now, I don't know what that is, but it's not local government. It's sub-regional or some sort. Anyway, the Labour government that was promoting that and were up for making that change lost the 1970 general election. The Conservative government that was introduced that won introduced a two-tier system across the country, and gradually since that time, that's been eaten away at with the creation of unitaries in various areas. My conspiracy theory, and it is a consideration, and I most of my academic colleagues accuse me of being theory light, and I always argue no, I believe in conspiracy theories. That's the ones that carry the weight. So my conspiracy theory about local government is that since 1969, a copy of the Mould report has been sitting in a desk in Whitehall, and every time a new local government minister comes along, civil servant takes it out the drawer, blows off the dust, and say, "There you are, minister. That's how you could make your mark. We don't need all these pesky councils. We certainly don't need all these pesky councillors. Think how neat and tidy the map would be, and think how easier it would be for us to control local government if there was just fewer of it." And I've heard ministers talk at sort of various events where they've got local government are doing a wonderful job, fantastic, absolutely marvelous. I just wish there were fewer of you. And it's like saying all the evidence says this is okay, but we're ideologically wedded to fewer and fewer units of local government, and there's been a gradual decrease in the number of councils that we have since 1972, as you rightly said, up until very recently. Proposals are coming out to replace 15 councils with 3 or 4. And I like that, that casual, do we need these 15 councils? Should we just have 3 or 4? Well, make your mind up. Is it 3? Is it 4? What, be a little bit more precise. My response is, well, that particular area, do we need these 16 MPs? Can't we just have 3 or 4? Wouldn't that be nice? That would save a few bob. And not only that, it would probably be more effective for good governance. But we are looking
Just
at
on that
purely.
note for a second, I just wanted to just pick up on that. When you talk about the combining of local governments together from a central standpoint, do you find because here in Alberta, literally in the province that Ian and I are both recording this from right now, we are seeing two smaller local governments actually being amalgamated or dissolved into their more rural counterparts. Are you, and that's on their own fruition, one through a plebiscite, a referendums
Yeah.
asking people, do you want to do this? And one through council saying, we just can't do it anymore. Are you seeing more local governments saying, you know what? Why are we doing this as three? We can do this as one and actually work together. Is there a understanding that sometimes unified is actually stronger than being divided?
There is an element of that absolutely within local government itself, and we've had a few councils voluntarily merge. We've had some councils put forward proposals to the centre for the creation of unitaries. Often there's a battle. It won't be all of the councils that are affected that will put. So there's like a mixed view on it, a mixed bag within local government itself. But the reality of it is, if you simply make local government bigger and don't do anything else, all you've got are bigger versions than what you had before. The problems are the same, the finances are the same, the inability to deal with those issues is the same. All you've got is it's over a bigger scale. What you really need to be doing, and this is where, a lot of the debate about local government, often about its scale and its size, operates in an evidence-free environment. For 50 years, there's been a plethora of studies, independent academic, not paid for consultant studies, independent academic studies that says sometimes bigger local government might be better, sometimes it might be worse. There is absolutely no guaranteed outcome that bigger will be cheaper, more efficient, more effective. Sometimes smaller units of local government are cheaper, more efficient, and more effective. What really matters is the resources that they have access to, the skill of political leaders, the skill of officers, and a whole bag of other freedoms and powers that really matter in terms of, can we carry on doing what we're doing? And some of our political leaders in this country have been exceptionally sophisticated in dealing with problems, whereas others have gone, oh, it's too much, we need to amalgamate. I mean, one of the other, I'll give you this very quick thing. Our councils operate on the basis of two main taxes: business rates, which isn't really a local tax anyway, and the council tax, which the centre caps if it wants to, and controls how much councils can raise. I always say this, and it's absolutely classic. Many of the people I've spoken to, I don't think they would have been to any country in the world, including Canada, where you check out of your hotel, you're given your hotel bill, and then you're given your municipal tax bill, and that money goes into the council. Yeah, I remember when I was over in Canada, we even in the restaurants there was some of them, there was like a local tax added on to the bill. We have nothing like that. We have these two taxes. I'm not saying you could float your entire municipality off of a council tax. No, sorry, off of a tourist tax. But you could add to what you've got. You could bolster those resources. But our councils in this country are not allowed to do that. And even the taxes that they do have, they are heavily controlled. So if you simply make local government bigger and don't give it anything else, you've just got bigger problems.
So,
And
so
that's
the
what the evidence is.
So the organization that represents all 4,000, the majority of the 4,000 plus municipalities in Canada, called the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, is singing your praise right now, because this is the topic that they're talking about right now. They are asking the
Well,
federal and the provincial governments to come to the table to talk about a new fiscal framework, because they only have two sources of revenue, which is assessments on values
yeah,
and property taxes. And this is just not how you do it, because there's so many major issues that municipalities are faced with, whether
yeah.
that be infrastructure, whether that be growth, whether that be housing supply. When you look across the United Kingdom, and I want to sort of ask about the individual countries that make up them here for a second before we move on, because I'm cautious of time here. So hopefully have an extra 5 minutes for us. Is it different? Are the issues in Scotland different from Wales, that are different from Northern Ireland, that are different from England? Or is there a common theme? Because In Saskatchewan, our neighbor province, and in Ontario, the issues are the same, but how the provincial governments address those issues are completely different. Are you seeing a different version of how to solve an issue in each of your individual countries that make up the
Yeah,
United Kingdom?
I mean, the answer is, as you might expect, is yes and no. I mean, Northern Ireland is an outlier. The local government in Northern Ireland is very different in terms of what it does and what it can do compared to England, Scotland, and Wales. So there's a bigger issue with Northern Ireland. So if I can just, I never ignore it because it's a place where local government has so much potential to do more.
Okay.
But you've got an assembly that also, if it passed everything down to local government, would be thinking, well, what do we do? And that's the problem with the Parliament in Scotland and the Assembly in Wales as well. It's been in some respects, it was like a experiment in devolution that ended up being a case study in centralisation. So the central governments in Scotland and Wales are not. I mean, they've got very different approaches to the way the British state has in England to local government, but the issues are broadly the same. Financing. I mean, in Wales, it was a while ago now, but every now and then the issue of the size of Welsh councils comes up. There was a proposal a few years ago which started off along the lines of, do we need 9, 10 or 11 instead of these 22? You know, again, it's that bonkers. You know, we're not asking what do we want local government to do, how do we want it to be financed, we're asking how many we need. You can't ask that question until you work out what you want it to do. And we've never really done that in this country. It's been fiddled by various central governments. Yes, local government in Scotland, Wales, and England have varying levels of freedom, varying levels of policy preference that they can use. But the issues about finance, scale, and central control tend to be the same. The centre controls because that's the system, and we've never really effectively challenge that in the sense of saying, well, how would I mean, if you look at a lot of the systems post-communism in Eastern Europe, you know, many cases there, people sat down and designed a new local government. Said, what do we want it to look like? What do we want it to do? We've never done that. All we've ever done that about is structure and size. How many do we want, and what boundaries do we want them to have? And the fact that those boundaries bear absolutely no relevance or relationship to the areas that people have any loyalty or affinity to, and are proud of, and you know, have that intense local patriotism that emerges about a town or where you're born, and none of that matters. What we want are technocratically neat boundaries on a map, because that makes it easier for the centre, and in your case, the province, to ensure that local government matches. Now, if you want me to come over and do an all expenses speaking tour of Albert, I'm up for it. I tell you, I'm on the next plane.
Sponsored by the Cross Border Network and Strategic Steps.
Absolutely.
Bring it
yes,
all, Dr.
You might want to wait till summer.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, yes. If you had one. But yes, yes, we can talk about that. Yeah.
I'd like to wrap up my question, and my final question for you is perhaps turning the focus forward. We talked about current state. Are you generally optimistic or pessimistic about potential restructuring reforms or productivity of local government?
I'm very pessimistic. I think we're on a one-way ticket to abolishing completely the local in local government. I think our structural journey will, as I've said, result in councils that make no sense to people that live in them. They'll make sense to people in Whitehall, and they might make sense to some local politicians, but they won't make sense to people that will have bigger and bigger, more anonymous, distant authorities, which is actually all they'll be, authorities. They'll be, and the consequence of that, we will see electoral turnout plummet. We're already at the bottom of the electoral turnout league across Europe, absolutely rock solid at the bottom of electoral turnout table across Europe. And one of the things that research has shown is the bigger local government gets, the more turnout declines. And of course, if you make local government bigger and you find, hang on a minute, this isn't working, where'd you go? Well, the answer is make them bigger. You don't go backwards. There's no mechanism by which we can disaggregate in this country.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one journey until we get to the magic 58, and then it'll all be perfect.
So
I suspect not, because we're not giving local government any more freedom and autonomy. We're not giving it any more resources. The government, with its combined, I'm squeezing this in right at the end, its combined authority agenda, which is sort of creating merging a number of authorities, but not abolishing them, giving them a directly elected mayor, or if they don't want that, a joint board effectively, and then they receive some devolution. So even in those areas where you scrap districts and you have a county-based or a two-county-based unitary that then has an elected mayor and a combined authority structure, you've reinvented the two-tier system, only bigger, which I think is probably the point.
Looking towards 2025, as we're recording this at the end of 2024, what are you looking for in the local governance realm in 2025? Is there a story? Is there a policy? Is there something from central government that you're going to be looking at to ensure the viability of local governments? Or are you just hopeful that, or pessimistic to use your words, that things won't get worse before they get better?
Yeah, no, I think I'm very much in the latter camp. Quite a very pessimistic, very well, in fact, more than that, I'm actually worried about, I'm frightened for the future of local government. I'm frightened for the future of what this journey we're on will mean for communities of place and communities of interest across the country. I'm worried very much about what the end game is, where that will eventually take us. Our governments have also talk a good game when it comes to devolution. So this is about the fifth time in as many years I've heard the term devolution revolution, which we're having another one. It's a bit like one of those, banana republics in Latin America somewhere that's in constant revolution, where yet another devolution revolution we're experiencing. Well, actually, if you ask me, it's a bit of a con, because we're not in England particularly. We've devolved to Scotland and Wales. They've got their legislative chambers that have got autonomy from the centre in a vast number of areas. Local government in England is getting nothing like that. It'll get some more stuff to do, which is always good because it brings services closer to people. It might get a little bit more local government largesse to do it, and we're talking, millions and millions of pounds, but over a period of time. So there might be some more money coming, but there's no freedom, there's no autonomy, there's no desire to see local government as an independent political governing institution. That's real devolution. What we're being offered is decentralization, which is very different from devolution. We're not being offered devolution, although we are using that term. So more stuff to do, some more money, but here's the kicker: it all comes with central oversight. And it all comes in the sure and certain knowledge that if the government needs to take what it has given away, it will do that. If it needs to restructure, it will do that. If it needs to create new regulations to control what you're doing, it will do that. And that's why I'm pessimistic. And I genuinely think, and I hope I'm wrong, and I remain to be convinced that we are now entering that phase of the real end of the local in local government. And we're simply replacing a system that served us well with a vain hope that things will get better if we create these huge anonymous entities that nobody will really care about.
Professor, I want to thank you so much.
Bombshell.
On that bombshell, that's the perfect way. Professor, I never know what we're going to get from these interviews when we talk to local leaders and stakeholders from across Canada, but now around the world with yourself and our guest from Australia. And you seem like a wealth of knowledge, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface on the similarities and the differences between our two great countries. I do truly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to sit down and do this interview, because we can only learn when we talk. And when talking to you, it seems like you are passionate about local governance in the United Kingdom, and it comes across that way. And I truly appreciate, and I'm speaking for myself and for Ian, if you don't mind, Ian, but thank you so much for
Nope.
joining us today and
No, it's a pleasure.
doing this
And
interview.
I would just say, if you're looking to do anything with local government in Canada, look at what we've done and don't do that.
Thank you.
And then on the
You'll
flip
be
side, if you're thinking about doing anything in the United Kingdom, look at Canada and go, whoa, maybe
yeah.
not.
Well, I'll have to come over and check first, won't
Yes,
I?
clearly, clearly.
Are you looking for a team of experienced professionals to help develop a strategic plan for your municipality? Look no further. At Strategic Steps, their team of experts has years of experience working in municipal administration. They take a comprehensive approach to planning, carefully listening to your community's needs, and working closely with your council to develop a homegrown strategy tailored to your unique community. Contact Strategic Steps today to learn more about how they can help you create a brighter future for your community. Call Strategic Steps at 780-416-9255 or visit strategicsteps.ca to get started. Ian, that was colorful, eye-opening, and sort of brilliant at the same time. It's not often we get to speak to someone who with so much passion and learn so much from our guest. How'd you think the interview went?
I would certainly concur with you. Usually, when you and I have a conversation, we stop in Newfoundland. We went a little bit further east this time and ended up on another island, and that's pretty spectacular. Some of the professor's turns of phrase were really useful, really fun and colorful, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from what he had to say and what's happened with local government in the UK. Of course, we have evolved from that system, and they are further ahead than we are. So what we saw him say might actually be in our future if we don't take his note of caution seriously.
It's true. For those who are listening and watching this, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our great shows, whether it be this, the Municipal Affairs, the show that Ian and I host, the Political Trenches, Local Government at Work, or our in-depth analysis of everything going on in local governments from a local governance perspective on the cross-border interviews. So until next time, this is our last Municipal Affairs show of 2024. We still have our continuation of our 2024 year in review series heading on until Friday. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with a brand new episode tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Until then, everyone, talk to you soon.